recognizable as exactly the same deity. We're told to say, our God and your God is one God. But not on the level of form and not on the level of revelation. They're very, very different types of revelation. So, as you travel along this path, according to this image given us by Sheikh Al-Bakr, you receive a stronger dose of the particular essence of your religion. So you become more attuned to the essential elements of your own tradition, the closer you come to the center that manifests that tradition, but also transcends it. So, this is what I really want to stress at this part of the talk, that our sense of transcendence, our sense that God is above and beyond all things, while comprising all things, does not diminish necessarily our absoluteness of commitment to the form of the religion that's emanated from that formless essence. Many people think that if we go too far above and beyond the form, we don't pay any attention to the form. And we say, well, if this form is correct, and the Jewish one is correct, and the Christian one is correct, then I don't really have to take this particular form seriously. We're all going up the same mountain. And I can choose to become a Jew or a Christian and swap forms and so on and so on. Whereas the truth is that if you follow a particular path, recognizing its relativity, you reduce the possibility of formalistic idolatry. You're no longer focusing on the form as such, but you're focusing on the divine that transcends all form. So you're moving towards that essence with a greater degree of tawheed. Remembering that tawheed does not simply mean oneness or unity, but making one. You make yourself one by appreciating and recognizing fully the reality of that oneness. So this image gives us a sense of greater rootedness in Islam. And I can't help but bring up this image of Sayyid Hussein Nasr, who likewise is one of the very great masters of the perennial philosophy, and now with the passing away of Sheikh Al-Bakr is the undisputed senior exponent of this perspective. He gives an image which is very close to that given by Sheikh Al-Bakr, which is that the roots, he says in his intellectual autobiography, Philosophy of Sayyid Hussein Nasr, that the roots of my identity as a Muslim are deepened in proportion to the roots that I acquire through my universality. And when he wrote this, it made me think of the subtitle of the Masnavi, which is the roots of the roots of the roots of religion. So the more you go deep into the roots of your particular religion, invariably the deeper you go into the roots of religion as such, into the roots of the divine names and qualities that produce those religions. And so what happens is you're more firmly rooted, you're not shaky, you're not in any danger of being uprooted as a Muslim by opening out to all of the other traditions, intellectually and spiritually. There's no question of a formal opening to other religions. You practice the rites of Islam, rites of Sufism, while being open to analogous phenomena, the beauties and truths and sanctity of other traditions. I can't help but quote here a saying of Fridtjof Schuon, which bears on the same subject. He says that the awareness within Christianity he was speaking, if you're aware of the Christ who was before Abraham is, the Christ who referred to himself as he said, saying, before Abraham was, I am, that eternal Logos. And just as a digression here, in Islam we have the saying of the Prophet analogously, I was a prophet when Adam was between water and clay. That this prophetic reality encompasses all prophetic revelation and not just one. Fridtjof Schuon says that this understanding of the eternal Logos, the intelligence of God manifesting itself in supra-cosmic mode, does not diminish our participation in the treasures of the historical redemption. On the contrary, They bestow upon those treasures a compass that touches the roots of existence. In other words, it's not a question of choosing between the historical treasure, the specific life, the sunnah of the Prophet, and saying that that is not so important. What matters is the principle of the eternal logos. It's a question of bestowing upon your love of the particular Prophet a compass, a scope, a framework that elevates your love of the man who came in the 7th century up to the level, the divine stratosphere of revelation, from which emanate all of the revealed traditions. So what you're doing is adding greater glory to the Arabian Prophet. You're not diminishing anything of his glory by recognizing something of that same prophetic reality that he embodied in all of the other traditions. So you're touching the roots of existence and thereby deepening your rootedness in your particular faith by recognizing all faiths. Now this is the second aspect of this thought I wanted to speak about. The first was that it's a truth that calls out to be realized and not just thought about. The second aspect is universalism. It's a truth that's universal and not specific. Of course, universality comprises all specificities, but is not reducible to any one. So it's a universal truth. And now we come to the third aspect of his thought, which I feel is fundamental, and that's the aspect that can be referred to as perennial. Now you may think that universalism is the same as perennialism, but there is a difference, because universalism pertains to space. In its initial idea of the universe, it's a spatial opening up to other traditions, other religions. Whereas perennialism is more of a temporal concept, saying that the truths are perennial. They are always there. They don't come at some time and not at another time. They're there continuously. And they're always accessible. That's the essence of perennialism, and which is bringing me now closer to the basic theme of this title, a message of hope at the 11th hour. Because, of course, this is the title of one of his books, The 11th Hour. And a major misconception about the perennialist thesis is that it's all about nostalgia for an irretrievable, ostensibly pristine, primordial past, and a failure to really cope with the exigencies of the present. It's a hankering after tradition with a capital T, wherever it's to be found, and a rejection of modernity in all its forms. This is totally, of course, a simplistic, shorthand way of referring to perennialism and an easy way of rejecting it. Oh, the perennialists, yes, they believe in tradition, and everything about modernity is bad, so we don't have to take them seriously. The medievalists. So, what I wanted to say under this heading of perennialism, with this doctrine of the 11th hour, is that it's a message of hope and not of despair. It's not all about doom and gloom. Yes, the perennialists say that primordial man, the primordial tradition, by which they mean the Golden Age, or what the Hindus refer to as Krita Yuga, the accomplished, Krita is accomplished, it's the accomplished age where everything is perfect, before coming down, declining through the Trita Yuga, the Dvapara Yuga, to the Kali Yuga, where we are now. Yes, the perennialists believe that in all of these traditions there is a sense, as Mudad Majid said earlier, that we have actually fallen from above, but having fallen from above, we are now degenerating, and we need to retrieve something from our tradition in order to retrieve our integrity. As it says in the Quran, Surah Al-Teen, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We created man in the best stature. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Then we reduced him to be the lowest of the low. That is, in a sense, the perennialist thesis, that we were Golden Age, in the finest stature, but now moving towards this dark age of rationalistic pretension and industrial, post-industrial pollution, we're moving away from that ideal state. So, how do the perennialists, Martin Lings in particular, Sheikh al-Bakr, how do they respond to this? They say, he says in his book, The 11th Hour, we are living in a dark age, but an age in which, paradoxically, by way of compensation, divine grace and divine mercy is more available. Not that it is more objectively than it ever has been in the past, but that against the background of such darkness, the glimmers of light of divine mercy and grace are more conspicuous. And this is expressed in the very parable of the 11th hour, and in a saying of the Prophet that says that in the beginning of Islam, he who omits 1/10 of the Sharia will be damned. But at the end of Islam, in other words, in what we call the 11th hour, in the Akhir Zaman, he who manages to practice, accomplish 1/10 of the Sharia will be saved. So there's a lack of common measure between the total grace and the total mercy and sanctity, prophecy. The presence of the Prophet was so compelling to his followers that it would have been abominable for them to have omitted even 1/10 of the Sharia as it was at that time. Whereas at the end of time, so distant and so removed are we from that original purity, that if we can manage in this dark period to practice 1/10, we, according to the Prophet, will be saved. So this superabundance of mercy that compensates for the difficulties, in particular in our times, of practicing Islam, is what the 11th hour, the book The 11th Hour is all about. And the parable in the Gospel is, of course, that the workers who are taken from the market to the vineyard to work, those workers received the same wages. Those who worked through the heat of the day and those who worked in the 11th hour, in other words, only for that last hour of the day. And Christ said the ones who worked in that last hour of the day would actually be paid first. And then everyone else would be paid, and they're paid the same wage. This expresses that same superabundance of mercy that comes at a difficult time. The mercy is always there, but it becomes more, as it were, available. We can avail ourselves of it. Added to that, because of the darkness of this prevailing gloom, all of the forces that militate against spirituality, all of the forces that are there to divert you and distract you and to keep you entrenched in the marketplace, which stands for passivity in regard to outward profanity. The vineyard stands for activity with regard to the kingdom of heaven in this parable. All those forces that are trying to keep us in the marketplace, keep us in the busyness and the hayat of dunya, and prevent us from moving towards spiritual activity. And there are so many of them, of course, today, and it's increasing with time. There's a book by Neil Postman called Entertaining Ourselves to Death. And that expresses very well, he's a professor of communications at New York University. We're literally in the process of educating, of entertaining ourselves, amusing ourselves to death by seeking distraction constantly. Now, if in this sort of framework we're able to pull ourselves out of the marketplace, out to the hayat of dunya, we're given a sort of energy which previously would have been lacking, because pulling yourself out of something that's so alluring, with so many tentacles, generates in and of itself a momentum that will be added to the spiritual work. So moving out into the spiritual life becomes actually a far greater progress in a shorter space of time, ironically speaking, ironically to think of, than in previous times when the relationship between the market and the vineyard was more harmonious. The world was not so worldly in previous times as it has become in our time, in the sense that its lure was less dominated by distraction. And it was more harmoniously integrated into a tradition which prolonged the influx of the Spirit into the world. So rather than taking any negative conclusions from this cosmic situation that we're in, we should be able to capitalize on the abundance of mercy and, as he said so often to us, to be aware that we are called upon to transform every moment into a moment of mercy, into a moment of rahmah. At every moment we are capable of transforming an outwardly difficult situation into an inwardly beatific one, through this captivating force of this mercy that's ever available. In his presence, he manifested this opening to mercy. And this again, we go back to the notion of walaya. Walaya in Sufism is established as the stamp of the dhikr, of the remembrance of God upon the soul. And Shaykh al-Bakr put a tremendous amount of emphasis on dhikr Allah, as does the Quran. He would of course understand and encourage people who said that the dhikr Allah is the prayers and the recitation of the Quran, reflecting on the Quran, meditating on the signs of God, and all of these other forms of thinking of God. But as the Quran itself says regarding the very practical aspects of dhikr, referring to those who reflect on the signs, the ayat in the heavens and the earth, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. Those who do the dhikr Allah, who remember God standing and sitting and reclining on their sides. He encouraged us to do the dhikr as a practice, remember the name of God, and also, if we're not called to the Sufi path, to remember God through reciting the Quran and all of the other ways of reflection and meditation. We'll come to this point now in a somewhat roundabout way by referring to the poem that we have in front of you in your brochures, the self-portrait, which gives us beautifully the relationship between openness to the other religions and perennialism, which is not pessimistic, and an essentialism which is based on dhikr Allah. So, in this poem, which you all have in front of you, the self-portrait, you will read that he goes through in beautiful forms, beautiful expressions, Orpheus and Krishna and his flute, the Buddha raising his flower in a sermon, Abraham's prayer, Jesus and his mother at the marriage in Canaan. Then he comes finally to the prophet. It's as if he's complaining all the way through that I was not there. I could not hear that flute. I was not there to make my bay'ah to the Arabian prophet beneath the tree in the Bay'at al-Ridwan. So all the way through you're thinking that he's going through these marvelous revelations of God and bemoaning the fact that he was not present. And towards the end of the poem you see that he says, there was a time when I would ask why I was writ down so late in the destiny, in fate, in the book of fate. But then you get the essence of this apparent complaint. And it's a profound opening, a joyous opening to the eternally present reality, underlying and infusing all of those forms. When he says, no more I say would it had been, for I have seen what I have seen, and I have heard what I have heard. So if to tears ye see me stirred, presume not that they flow from woe. In thankful wonderment they flow. Praise be to him, the Lord, the King, who gives beyond all reckoning. So what he's saying here is that if you see me crying, don't think that I'm crying because I'm bewailing the fact that I was not there in those early revelations and it was my sad lot to be born in this dark and miserable and godless age. No. For I have seen what I have seen, and I have heard what I have heard. He has seen the reality of those revelations with the eye of his heart. He's heard the message of those revelations with his heart. How is that possible? Through the dhikr of Allah, through remembrance of God, through moving along that tariqah and coming closer to that center. You are polishing up your heart. And there's a beautiful commentary on the effect of the dhikr on the heart that comes in the commentary of Sayyidina Ali Karramallahu wajhahu wa alayhi salam, when he says in relation to the ayat an-nur in the Quran that, in the verse that comes after the ayat an-nur, about houses wherein this light is present. بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه. يذكر فيها اسمه, in which the name of God is invoked. Then he says that God has made the invocation إن الله جعل الذكر جلاء للقلوب. Truly God has made the dhikr a polish for the hearts, by which they hear after they're deaf and they see after being blind. Precisely the two things that Shaykh al-Waqf mentioned in his poem. He has seen what he has seen and he has heard what he has heard. Now this they, when Imam Ali refers to by which they see after being blind and they hear, he's not referring to the rijalun la tulhihim tijaratun wa la bay'un an dhikrillah, because he's using it in the feminine. And the feminine, grammatically, is referring back to the plural of qulub. It's the hearts that come to see, not the men as such, not their eyes, not their ears, but you have seen what you have seen with the eye of your heart. Now, how can I presume to bring these two things together and assume that Shaykh al-Waqf wanted us to understand that it was through the dhikr that he has seen what he has seen and he has heard what he has heard? Could we not just say he saw it with the eye of his imagination, with the khayal munfasil that Nadr Majid talked about? Is it not enough just to say he was so creative, so imaginative, so open to that world of archetypes that he could see through the clouds of human obfuscation to the reality of luminous revelation? Can't we just leave it at that? We could, but we could also go a step further and say, in addition to this unquestionable dimension to his vision, we could also say that at the end of his poem, when he says, praise be to him, the Lord, the King, who gives beyond all reckoning. Look at those words, beyond all reckoning. It's an English poem with English words, and yet anyone who knows Shaykh al-Waqf's perspective knows that he is translating here the Arabic of the Quran, بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَرْزُقُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. Truly God gives sustenance beyond all reckoning to whomsoever he will. What is the connection? The connection is that these are the words spoken by the Blessed Virgin when she was asked by Zakaria, where did you get these fruits? Zakaria, who was in charge of Maryam at the temple, he found with her, according to tradition, fruits that were out of season. And he says, Anna laki hada, where did this come from for you? How did you get this? And she said, Huwa min indillah. Inna Allah yarzuqu man yasha'u bighayri hisab. This has come from God. God truly gives rizq to whom he will, beyond all reckoning. Now again you might be wondering, where is this leading? It's leading to this point, that the fruits that she refers to, that are out of season, they're there all the time. They are there perennially. And what else are we told in the Quran about fruits that are given all the time, perennially? We're told in Surah Ibrahim that أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا كَلِمَةً طَيِّبَةً كَشَجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ أَصْلُهَا ثَابِتٌ وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ تُؤْتِي أُكُلَهَا كُلَّ حِينٍ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهَا. Here we have a reference to a good word is as a good tree. Do you not see how God strikes analogies? A good word is as a good tree. Its roots are firm and its branches lead up to heaven. It gives forth its fruits. Here the word for fruit is thamar, as opposed to rizq. But here it's the same idea. It gives its fruits, that which you can eat from it. It gives forth its fruits in every time. Kulla heen, every moment. This is not an ordinary tree that gives forth its fruits only at a particular season. It gives forth its fruits continuously, perennially, by the lead of its Lord. Now Shaykh al-Bakr is very fond of reciting this verse, and he has spoken of it as, in one of his books, as referring implicitly to the invocation of the name. If a good word is as a good tree, what is the best of all possible words? The divine name. When you invoke that divine name, your roots are firm. You're rooted in reality. The fruits, the branches, the farah, of the sama. And this Shaykh al-Bakr explains very beautifully, as saying that when you give yourself to the divine name, you are initiating a process of reverberation. And again, take note of the word, reverberate. The word verb is being repeated in a repercussive mode within your being. You, when you give yourself to the divine name and its invocation, an apparently monotonous practice, repeating the name Allah, Allah, doing nothing else, what you're doing is initiating a process of repercussion, reverberation, that he says is not like a flat utterance that spreads horizontally, but a sacramental ascent with repercussions to the whole hierarchy of being, right up to that point at the summit where this divine name emanated from. So you have the invocation that gives these fruits. And what are the fruits? The fruits of virtue. If you invoke the divine name, you cannot but, in the long term, either become more virtuous or at least intend to become more virtuous. Up to God. It's up to God what degree those fruits will be delicious. But it's up to you to give yourself to the virtues, and that will happen through the invocation if you give yourself to it with sincerity. So you see the linkages here, that if one is aware of this logos, this intelligent self-manifestation of God throughout all of the religions, and you practice one particular path, and you give yourself to it universally and perennially for the sake of realization, then the invocation that you're given to perform will reveal not just the fruits which you can taste, but also will reveal the inner substance of religion as such, and not just such and such a religion. And finally, I'd just like to say that just a few days before he died, Shaykh al-Bakr planted a tree. And this is symbolically reenacting that for the sake of which he lived. To plant the seed of the remembrance in his own heart and in the heart of all of those who were blessed by his radiance. He also did this in conformity to the hadith of the Prophet. So when you see the last day coming and you're planting a tree, continue with the planting of it. In other words, there is no time, however disastrous it may appear, however catastrophic, however much it may be dark, and we are surrounded by darkness and with imminent catastrophes. What matters is not to be depressed. Who despairs of the mercy of God, save the disbelievers? Man yaqnutu rahmatullah illa al-kafirin. Who is it that despairs of the mercy of God other than the kafirs? So, when you see this gloom and this doom and these imminent catastrophes, do you become pessimistic? And do you think, oh, the world is coming to an end, or that my world may come to an end, or that my life might come to an end? You don't say any of those things if you are a true perennialist. Because what matters is that at this point in time, even if it appears that the hour is approaching, and remember that the Prophet, when asked by Gabriel in the Hadith Jibreel, when will the hour come? He said the one questioning knows no more than the one question. And then Gabriel said, well, what are its signs? And the Prophet said, the signs are that the slave girl will give birth to her mistress, and that the naked, destitute Arabs of the desert will compete with each other in building tall buildings. يَتَتَاوَلُونَ فِي الْبُنْيَانِ. So he gave us signs, but he didn't say when it would be. No one knows but God when the time will come, so there's no use whatsoever in engaging in idle speculation about the end. All we know is that in a vague sense we're in the 11th hour, there are signs that indicate we're close to the end. But what we take from this consciousness, far from pessimism, far from gloom, we take from it that eternal optimism that's rooted in the eternal reality of God's mercy. To convert this moment into a moment of mercy, to give ourselves to that sacred wasila that God has given to us, the sacred means by which He's calling to us. Sayyidina Shaykh al-Baq was one who responded to the call of God. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu istajibu lillah wa lirrasul idha da'akum lima yuhyikum. O ye who believe, respond, give your jawab, stajibu, reply to God when He and His Prophet call you to that which gives you life, to that which enlivens. That call is being made at every single moment, to every single one of us, however bad the situation appears to be on the outward plane. Inwardly we have access to that mercy, that call, and we have such means at our disposal as provided by the prophets, the saints, and those who are like the saints. And it's for us to do our best to live up to that, inshallah. Barakallah.
अब सवाल जवाब का मुख्तसर सा सिलसिला शुरू किया जाता है। हाज़रीन कराम को दावत दी जाती है कि वो सवालात या तासुरात का इजहार करें। मैं उर्दू में खुसूसन खिताब कर रही हूँ ताकि अगर आप उर्दू में सवाल पूछना चाहें तो बिस्मिल्लाह। दूसरा, हमारी इस्तकबालिया कमेटी के अरकान यहाँ हैं, जो कोई सवाल कागज़ और कलम पर लिखना चाहे तो वो हाजिर हैं, उनसे मंगवा लीजिए। I'll start with somebody handed me the first question, which is, what is the difference between sovereignty in Islam and the concept of sovereignty in the West? Could you please explain sovereignty in the light of Islam and other religions, whether the 7 ayat of Surah Fatiha are enough to satisfy our hearts as dictated by God in Surah Al-Hajj?
Well, it's a big question, and
to just, because unfortunately I realised I've spoken over my limit somewhat. I'll try and be as brief as possible so I can take a few more questions. In the Surah Al-Fatiha, when we say Maliki Yawmiddin, the King of the Day of Judgment, the Lord of the Day of Judgment, the owner of the Day of Judgment, we are establishing our orientation to the archetype of that which a king stands for in the lower world. To the extent that a king is true to his function, or a queen to her function, there's a reality, a sovereign power that is at one with the principle of noblesse oblige. What you have been given obliges you to be noble. And in the Islamic conception of sovereignty, of the lordship of God on the Day of Judgment, it's a lordship which every individual is called upon to realize within themselves. So sovereignty is not just something pertaining to authority outside, beyond you. It's also a self-domination, self-authority, having authority and dominance over your own nafs. To go from, as I said, nafs al-amara to nafs al-lawama to nafs al-mutma'inna. To establish a self-dominion, which you can do only by submitting to that authority which you deem to be legitimate. Spiritual authority in the first instance, political authority in the second, if one regards that as legitimate. But spiritually, in the Islamic conception of sovereignty, you have to be sovereign over your own nafs. That's really the aim, to conquer your own soul and to be the malik of yourself, which you can only do by submitting to Maliki Yawmiddin. So I think I'll just stop at that point in that question.
What is meant by the notion that there is a prophet for every generation?
There's nothing that says there's a prophet for every generation. It says in the Quran, لِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٌ. For every ummah there is a messenger, which means that there is no people on earth to whom a message has not been delivered. So the whole world is covered by communities who have, as it were, no excuse, who have come within the purview, the ambit of one or other of the revealed messages.
How would you distinguish between wilaya and walaya?
It's really a question of spelling quite often. I mean, sometimes wilaya is spelled with the fatha, sometimes with the kasra, wilaya, walaya. In more recent times, people are making the distinction that walaya has a more political connotation, and wilaya has a more spiritual, but originally you find the two actually relating to the identical concept, which is that of authority as a result of sanctity. So we can subsequently differentiate between political wilaya, wilayat al-faqih for example, and walaya, the spiritual idea of sanctity. But in essence, wilaya is one and the same thing as walaya. It's just spelled differently, and it comprises that element of authority consequent upon spiritual sanctity, which is what, of course, the Prophet referred to again and again as being the key quality defining Imam Ali, as being the wali, the mawla, which has a very similar meaning from the same root. So the debate between the Shias and the Sunnis is precisely over whether walaya comprises both spiritual authority and political power, or whether it's exclusively spiritual. And in the spiritual application, it actually bridges the Shi'i-Sunni divide, so that everyone can accept the walaya of Imam Ali as a spiritual reality, even if they differ over the extent to which he should have been given political authority.
How do you view the relationship between the murshid and the murid?
That varies from tariqah to tariqah. There are some murshids in some tariqahs that have what you might call a hands-on approach, and they enter into the finer details of their murid's lives. There are others where a much greater degree of independence is given to the murids based on the doctrine and the method that they have been given, and they're more or less told to look after themselves and to refer to the murshid only in times of need, particular intellectual questions, moral dilemmas, spiritual paradoxes, but on the whole to govern themselves. So across the board you have a wide spectrum of possibilities as regards the murshid and murid.
It is stated in the Quran, and you also mentioned that at the time of creation, all human souls were asked, "Am I not your Lord?" And all said yes. Do I, as a human being now, have any realization in my body or mind or soul of this? I can't read the last one. Of this commitment.
Of this commitment. Yes, to quote Sheikh Al-Bakr on this, he said that upon contact with actualized perfection, realized perfection, you will have this nostalgic recognition of a fulfillment that is still a possibility for you. Unless the rubble, he uses this term, the rubble of your fallen nature is so, I can't remember the word he uses, but he says unless that rubble is so impenetrable, something like that. If it's very impenetrable, if you are darkened completely by the rubble of your fallen nature, the asfal safadeen aspect, if you like, by your own passions, your egotism, your vanity, your attachment to the world, then of course, or even if in the lack of a fundamental humility, if you're not fundamentally humble in relation to the source of your existence, then you will not feel, upon contact with realized perfection, you will not feel a nostalgic recognition, a commitment that flows from the knowledge that you had when you were saying yes to God in your pre-human state. But in principle, the answer is that yes, you feel the commitment in the measure that you are true to your inner self. That self which was pure on the day of creation. And God says, in fact, after the verse bringing us to witness against ourselves, he says, this is lest you say on the day of judgment, of this we were ignorant, we have no knowledge. Inna an hadha ghafilin. Inna kunna an hadha ghafilin. So we have no excuse. We cannot say on the day of judgment, as we heard in the Surah Al-Fajr recited by Ali earlier, that the kafir on the day of judgment will say, Ya laytani. He will say, woe be to me. And in other words, laytani qaddamtu li hayati. If only I had done something for this, my real life. In other words, yes, everyone has a commitment, and only on the day when we meet our Lord will we say to Him, if only I had done something, because I cannot claim ignorance. Ignorance is no excuse in the eyes of the Lord. So we are told by the Quran that every single one of us bore witness against ourselves. Ashhad, we have borne witness against our own souls. Yes, we testify you are our Lord. So on the day of judgment, no one has any excuse, but we didn't know about this, and we feel no commitment, we felt no commitment. God will simply say, you felt nothing, because you were so enwrapped in your own egotism and your worldliness, your desire for the world, your desire for yourself, that you couldn't retrieve that light within you that was calling out to be realized, to be reunited with the source of all life, the Divine Son.
Is there any method of zikr which is proven from hadith involving saying Allahu, connecting with inner and outer breath, or any other name of Allah Ta'ala?
There are all sorts of practices that are implicitly referred to in the hadith. When the Shaykh Al-Alawi was asked, the Shaykh upon whom Shaykh Al-Bakr wrote a great biography, the Sufi saint in the 20th century, he was attacked by people who said, what is it that you're just saying Allahu, Allahu, Allahu? You need a preposition, you need some grammar. Allah is what? Allahu Jameel, yes. God is beautiful. But why do you say Allahu, Allahu? And he said, when a man came to the Prophet, a man was wounded in a battle, and he was groaning with pain. And the companion said, stop groaning now, the Prophet has come to you. The Prophet said, let him carry on, because Ah is also one of the names of God. So Sheikh Al-Ali said, if Ah is a name of God that can be repeated, can I not say Allah, Allah? This is one answer he gave. Now as regards to breathing techniques and so on and so forth, these are all so many developments that came through Sufi traditions, and sometimes upon contact with, especially in the Chishti and Qadri tariqas, contact with Hindu methods of yoga and so on and so forth, which may not find a specific justification in the hadith, but which is there in the nature of things. The way in which the breath is utilized in so many Sufi tariqas. The breath is, if you like, the most fundamental of all names of God. Because before you can say Allah, or every time you say Allah, you're breathing out. So the out-breath is in and of itself an invocation. The in-breath symbolizes the return of all manifestation to the principle. The out-breath expresses manifestation of the principle. So this is turned to spiritual account, this respiration, which in fact in Latin and in Greek, as well as letters in Arabic, the very word to respire evokes the idea of the spirit. Spiritus ubi volunt spirat. The spirit blows where it will. Now in Latin, the word spirit is the same as the word wind. So spirat, the verb, blowing, it's exactly the same as the word for spirit. Spirit and the wind are like one and the same things. You can hear where the wind comes from. You can hear the wind, but you don't know where it comes from or where it's going. And the saying continues, thus is everyone who is born of the Spirit. So the Spirit and the wind, and then by extension the breath, are all very intimately connected. And they all express the mystery of immanence, the divine presence within everything.
There's a slight nepotism here. Your cousin Kasham asks for some peace of mind as well.
I think the best dua is, of course, the dua that are found in the Quran itself. I would say that for peace of mind, the supplication that is most appropriate it would be a supplication based on the verse, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ السَّكِينَةَ فِي قُلُوبِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. He is the one who sends down the spirit of peace into the hearts of the believers.
These two questions are related, so I'll just read both of them. It is said, if you don't have a murshid, you cannot excel in spiritualism. Who was Sheikh Abu Bakr Sirajuddin's murshid? The other question is, what is Abu Bakr's view on whether we can travel on the way of Tasawwuf Sufism without any teacher, Waliul Kamil?
Well, he put a great deal of emphasis on following a spiritual path under the guidance of a murshid. Someone who is more experienced than oneself and who has the authority given by God to guide disciples. So he would say that if anyone wants to set out on a spiritual path, what matters is that he places himself in the sphere of guidance emanating from a murshid. If he can find a living murshid, that's best of all. But he would also add, of course, that in Sufism it's well known that the irshad of a great murshid is perpetuated through the tradition. And it can be that a person in a tariqah is not a murshid in the fullest sense, but is sufficiently qualified because he's effaced in that tradition to guide souls in accordance with the principles, even if he hasn't reached the level of highest irshad. So he would add that as a qualification, I think, that ideally you should follow a person who is a realized sage, saint, or at least a realized murshid, one who has the capacity to guide, failing which you are opening yourselves up to all sorts of dangers on the spiritual path. and all sorts of illusions. And it's for this reason that one speaks so much about the importance of worship, because as one travels closer to that center, in addition to all of the positive things I mentioned, there are also great dangers of delusion, of having had a taste of a higher reality, and then on the basis of that taste, appropriating to oneself an authority or a grandeur degree of realization that is completely false. So one has to be sober continuously, and it's the function of the master to keep you sober and to keep you aware of your total need for virtue, your humility, and your stability on the path of God.
Again, two related questions. Over history, a lot of people like St. Augustine have come up with different logical arguments for the existence of God. What logic did Martin Lings adhere to?
Spiritual logic. I'll just answer that very quickly. Spiritual logic. He wouldn't have said that you can prove God by any logical means. He would simply say that by the logic of your own spirit, you will be engulfed in the reality of God. You don't arrive at certitude through logical arguments, but you can make logical arguments on the basis of certitude.
What is the importance of logic in religion?
Well, as I've said, logic is there to express the certitudes. You cannot attain faith in God through a purely logical process, because logic depends, for its functioning, on a set of premises. If those premises are not rooted in certitude of God already, so that everything that flows therefrom is an expression of those premises, logical concomitance of those assumptions, you'll never arrive at a point in the logical process where you can say, I now believe in God, because you have to leap above and beyond all logical processes. Otherwise it will not be faith. Faith implies and requires a relativization of the whole sphere within which logic operates. Once you have been given that certainty and that faith, thereafter it becomes possible to employ logic in order to express rational concomitance. What is implicit in my faith? What is implicit, or what is inferable from the data of revelation? There you need logic to derive with sensitivity and intelligence. You need your logic to derive from these principles in the Quran, in the Hadith, in your everyday life. You need logic, rationality and clarity to translate the fruits of revelation into a way of life that is in harmony with that revelation. That's where logic comes in.
What is the role of Asma al-Husna to attain peace and serenity in the time of the 11th hour? And the other question is, we speak of subtlety, companion and wisdom to reach transcendence or the center. Why are the names of Allah, like Al-Jabbar or Al-Qahar, speak of his terrible qualities? Are these necessary? Also, why is the idea of Jahannam so pronounced in the Quran? Lastly, why are Quranic surahs not chronological? And another related question is, kindly comment on hell and punishment as described in the Quran.
There are too many questions for me to really do justice to in the short time that's left. And I think we were supposed to break for refreshments at 9, is that right?
Yes. In that case, there's one gentleman who just wanted to make a comment.
Sir, I am very impressed with your speech and dedication of teaching of Mr. Martin Lings. It was very helpful. But allow me to add a little critical comment to the tradition and most we are lacking. The teachings of Islam and Quran, they are, it looks to me, in direct contradiction in these teachings. Because when you speak of different traditions, the life of our Prophet was, we all know, a perpetual fight against all these traditions. He himself killed people and his disciples killed those people of other traditions and religions. And we all know that when his divorce was a jizya, a tax for even America. So he did not, what I can say, allow other traditions to exist. He was there to fulfill only Islam and only one was
I think I get your message, but there is time for another lecture. No, I think I need to just stress those points. They're very important ones. When the Prophet fought against the people of the book, he did so in obedience to divine injunctions to those who fought against him. The fundamental verse relating to warfare in Islam is do not aggress. All of the wars fought by the Prophet were wars of defense, every single one of them. When he fought against Christians or Jews, he fought against them as representatives of a state, not as representatives of a religion. When you said that the jizya that was imposed upon the people of the book, and that this shows that the Prophet, to quote you, did not want those other religions to exist, it's a fundamental contradiction between those two that you expressed. The jizya is a protection. The jizya is a tax to which the Christians and the Jews were subject, in return for which they were given the right not just to exist. It wasn't just they were given the right to exist. They were given the right to practice their religion fully. So much so that when Jews were thrown out of Spain, they found refuge in the Muslim world. When the Jews were thrown out of Eastern Europe, they found refuge in the Ottoman world. This tradition of tolerance that there is there in Islam, as a result of the jizya that you claim is there to show that we don't want the other religions to exist, it's the result of that jizya and that legal tolerance that we have the basis for what I'm talking about, reverence for the religion of the other. If the Prophet did not want those religions to exist, he would not have allowed the women of his community to marry Christians. He would not have allowed the men of his community to marry Christian and Jewish women. It would be a fundamental contradiction to allow your children to be brought up by a woman who believes in scriptures and who follows a religion that are there to be wiped out, as is the logical content of your comment. Those religions are there, with so many verses in the Quran are there to say that the revelation of the Quran is there to confirm, not to abolish. It's a musaddiq. It confirms and verifies that which has come before. How can you confirm and verify religions that have come before Islam if you're saying we don't want them to exist? It doesn't make any sense at all. And the only way in which you can overcome this isn't a place for debate. I'm responding to your 2 points. And what I would do to you now is to recommend you to read the Seerah of the Prophet, written by Martin Lings, and then to read an account of the life of Emir al-Qadr, as a person who you would recognize as, undoubtedly, as a Muslim who was fighting in the spirit of the jihad that you think is so important. He fought against Christians in Algeria. He kept them out of his country for 20 years nearly. But when he went to Damascus and he saw Christians being attacked for no reason whatsoever in the kind of aggressive warfare that wants to wipe them out because they're Christians, he stood up and he protected 12,000 Christians who went to the citadel and with his small troop of Algerian soldiers protected them. And when these fanatical Muslims came to him and said, "You killed Christians in Algeria, now we want to kill these Christians in Syria," he said, "I killed those people who called themselves Christians but who came to plunder my country. These people have done nothing to you. And our religion tells us and tells me I have to protect these people with my life. So if you want to get to them, you have to kill me first." And the debate went backwards and forwards. And then the Emir said to his troops that he thought he would have a fight. And they would be wiped out because this mob was thousands and that he had a few in his entourage. And he said that prepare yourselves to fight in a battle that is as sacred as the battle that you fought for in Algeria. So in other words, for the true Muslim, the spirit of jihad that animates the true Muslim, the spirit of sanctity and of virtue that animates the true Muslim, is the one who will die protecting Christians if necessary. Because he's the one who listens to the Quran, and the Quran says if we had not given them the right to fight and to repel others, then the aggressors would have pulled down mosques and churches and synagogues and cloisters. The Quran refers to all of these places which would have been pulled down. So the whole purpose of jihad, in that verse, the first verse which gave Muslims permission to fight, says protect the places of worship of these other religious believers, not just the mosques, because they're all places where the name of God is often invoked. So in the spirit of this kind of approach to the Quran and these noble exemplars, we can situate the political aspects of the Prophet's battles and his wars, and the religious and the spiritual value and the core of those battles, without confusing the two, without ever going from political conflict on the interstate or inter-imperial level and saying this somehow expresses the essence of Islam. It's the essence of Islam that determines the manner and the mode and the conduct of your war with others, which is why the Muslims were the first people, way before the Geneva Conventions, to establish proper codes of warfare. And one of those codes was do not attack monks, because they represent the essence of the Christian religion, and the Prophet recognized that, which is why when he allowed the Christians of Najran to pray in his mosque, this wasn't the act of a man who was out to destroy Christianity. He said, if you want to do your liturgy, you can do it here in my mosque. This is a man who wrote, according to certain historical documents, he signed with his seal a letter for the monks of St. Catherine in Egypt, Sinai Peninsula, saying not only that it's incumbent on Muslims to protect the places of worship of these Christians, these monks in this monastery, but he actually dictated وَيُثَبِّتُهَا فِي صَلَاتِهَا فِي بِيَعِهَا, that the Muslim has to actually make thabit, make strong and firm and consolidate the worship of the Christians in their own churches. That is the spirit of Islam. And what we're seeing today is unfortunately a violation of that spirit in the guise of the ideology of jihadism. And I think on that note, perhaps we should.
Yes, there are a number of more questions, but may I ask with the greatest respect that you continue the discussion outside. Before we finally thank the speaker, just two announcements. Martin Lings' books are available in Pakistan, published by the Iqbal Academy. There's a book list by the Sohail Academy. There is a book list just by the door if you'd like to take that. And finally, Samia Khan Mumtaz has introduced a Punjabi dessert, the Kangani Kheer, which is in small quantity, but we invite you all to have a taste of it. The Quran speaks of those who reflect, yatafakkarun, and commands us to remember Allah Ta'ala with fear and longing, as well as in other ways. The Prophet of Islam ﷺ said, 1 hour of reflection is worth far more than numerous actions. We thank Dr. Shah Kazmi for being such a strong vessel, and in his action tonight, we hope will lead us to contemplation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.